You've probably stared at those little bent-up fins at the tips of airplane wings and thought, yeah, that's just design, like something the engineers added to make the plane look cool, the plain equivalent of a spoiler on a Honda Civic. But here's the thing. Those curved tips are the reason your ticket didn't cost twice as much. They're the reason the plane you flew on last month didn't burn an extra ton of fuel. And the idea behind them, the actual physics, was figured out by watching a hawk glide. So what exactly are winglets? Why does every serious commercial jet have them? And why did it take a global oil crisis to make airlines finally care? Let's go. First, the basics. Winglets are the near vertical fins you see curving upward, sometimes slightly downward, at the very tip of each wing. You've seen them from your window seat 100 times. They're not antennae, they're not there to hold anything in place, and they are definitely not decorative. They exist because wings, left alone in the air, quietly fight themselves the entire flight. And that fight costs a fortune. Here's where most people get it wrong. The common guess is that winglets work like a second small wing, that they add extra lift and help the plane climb. That sounds logical, but it's almost completely wrong. Winglets produce almost no meaningful lift at all. That's not what they're for. The real problem they're solving is something called induced drag, a backwards pulling force that every single wing creates just by doing its job. To understand that, you need to know what a wing actually does to the air around it. A wing works by pushing air down. High pressure builds up underneath. Low pressure sits on top. That pressure difference is what lifts the plane. But here's where it goes wrong. At the very tip of the wing, where the high-pressure air underneath has nowhere else to go, it curls upward and outward to reach the low-pressure air on top. That curling motion creates a spinning spiral of air called a wingtip vortex. Think of it like a tornado, but horizontal, invisible, and trailing behind every wing constantly. That spinning vortex pulls the wing backward, not forward, backward, and the engine has to fight that pull the entire flight. That's induced drag. It's not caused by speed or shape. It's caused by the act of creating lift itself. Every wing that flies has it. Winglets act like a fence at the tip of the wing. They block that escaping airflow from curling as easily. The vortex still forms, but it's much smaller. Some of that energy even gets redirected slightly forward, which one theory suggests adds a small push in the right direction, though engineers still debate exactly how much. What nobody debates is the result. A typical winglet upgrade cuts fuel use by around 3 to 5% per flight. On a long-haul Boeing 777, that works out to roughly $500,000 saved per plane per year. That's not a rounding error. That's why airlines have paid to bolt winglets onto planes they already own, rather than just buying newer ones. The math is that clear. But here's where it gets crazy. If winglets reduce drag so well, why not just make the wings longer? Longer wings naturally spread the vortex further out and reduce induced drag on their own. In fact, a longer wingspan is technically better, but longer wings don't fit at airport gates. Gates around the world are built to a standard width, and airlines can't just redesign every terminal, so winglets are the workaround. You get the aerodynamic benefit of a wing several feet longer without the wing actually being longer. It's like widening a road by redesigning the lane markings instead of knocking down buildings on either side. And not all winglets look the same. The classic design is a simple vertical fin pointing upward, which you see on older 737s. Then there's the split-tip winglet, sometimes called a scimitar, on the 737 MAX, which forks into two blades at the tip, one angling up and one angling slightly down, for better drag control at cruise altitude. Airbus calls their version the sharklet, which appears on the A320neo and works on the same idea but with a slightly different curve. And then there's the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which skips the vertical fin entirely. Instead, the wingtip just angles backward at a steep rake. No upward fin, just a swept-back extension. Some engineers argue this raked tip actually outperforms traditional winglets at high altitude, though the debate is genuinely ongoing. The point is, there's no single right answer. Every design is a trade-off between weight, drag reduction, and what the gate can handle. Now here's where it gets crazy, because this wasn't a new idea when airlines finally adopted it. In 1897, not a typo, 1897, a British engineer named Frederick Lanchester figured out that putting a plate at the end of a wing could reduce tip losses. He sketched it. He patented it. Almost nobody built it. The technology of that era couldn't make real use of it. Then, in the 1970s, a NASA engineer named Richard Whitcomb, the same person who cracked the rules of supersonic flight, ran wind tunnel tests on curved wingtip devices and proved they worked on modern jets. Whitcomb reportedly spent time studying soaring birds. Eagles and hawks naturally fan their outer feathers upward during a long glide, and that spreading creates the same effect as a winglet. Evolution had already solved induced drag millions of years before anyone built an airplane. But here's the problem. Early jets were already working close to their weight limits. Adding winglets, which weigh around 300 to 400 pounds per set, about the same as 2 large motorcycles, wasn't worth it when fuel was cheap. Therefore, the idea sat on a shelf. But then the 1973 oil crisis hit. Then a second one in 1979. Suddenly, fuel savings of 3 to 5% weren't just nice. They were the difference between profit and loss. The first commercial plane to fly with winglets was the Learjet 28 in 1977. By the late 1980s and 1990s, they were spreading across commercial aviation. It took 70 years, 2 oil shocks, a NASA engineer, and a hawk for airlines to act on something a British inventor had sketched in the Victorian-era. This is the part everyone misses. This same physics is running quietly in things you encounter all the time without ever thinking about it. Every commercial flight you've taken in the last 2 decades almost certainly had winglets on the plane. Formula One cars use vertical end plates on their front wings. Those flat side pieces aren't just structure. Why, they block the tire's dirty air from spilling into the wing's lift zone. Same principle. Wind turbine blades are shaped at the tip specifically to reduce tip vortex losses and cut the whipping noise that spinning tips create. Racing bicycle helmets with that long tail fin are controlling how air separates off the back of your head, managing the vortex of airflow just like a winglet manages the wingtip spiral. Ship propeller blades are shaped at their tips to reduce a problem called cavitation, where spinning tips create pressure drops so violent that tiny bubbles form and collapse. Same tip pressure logic in water. Military fighter jets often carry missiles at the wingtips, and those missile rails accidentally act as end plates that slightly reduce vortex loss. It's a side benefit nobody planned. On drone racing frames tilt their arm tips at angles that cut down on the wash between rotors. And birds, every hawk, albatross, or eagle you've seen holding a long glide without flapping, those outer feathers spreading upward are running real winglet physics in real time. Then there's the wake turbulence delay at airports. When a large plane lands ahead of you and the control tower makes your pilot hold short and wait before takeoff. That's not random caution. That's the invisible horizontal tornado off those wingtips still spinning in the air above the runway, dangerous enough to flip a smaller plane. Winglets shrink that tornado but never eliminate it. You've been waiting for it your whole life without knowing what it was. But winglets aren't magic, and here's the honest part. That 300 to 400 pound weight penalty gets paid on every single flight, whether the plane is crossing the Pacific or hopping 45 minutes between 2 nearby cities. On short routes, the fuel saved at cruise altitude barely covers the extra fuel burned lifting that weight off the ground. Winglets are built for long-haul, high-altitude flying. The economics fall apart on regional hops. Early winglet designs also had real problems. Some poorly shaped designs actually increased drag at certain speeds, making things worse. Getting the angle, height, and curve exactly right required serious testing. And some engineers still argue that the 787's raked wingtip, with no vertical fin at all, is better than any traditional winglet design for high-altitude cruise. The honest answer is that the best solution depends on the plane, on the route, and the altitude. Engineering is always a trade-off, and winglets are no different. So the next time you settle into a window seat and look out at that curved little fin before takeoff, you're not looking at style. You're looking at 70 years of aerodynamic theory, a Victorian patent, a NASA wind tunnel, a hawk mid-glide, and one oil crisis that finally made the math undeniable. That bent piece of aluminum is quietly strangling a tornado that would otherwise steal your speed, drain the fuel tank, and raise your ticket price every minute of every flight. It's not decoration, it's the wing refusing to fight itself. And it works.